Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session about protecting LGBTQI plus people in war zones and conflict situations. I realize we're coming on after lunch, and it's a pretty heavy topic, but it is an incredibly important topic, so I'm glad to see you're all here. I want to start by acknowledging that we're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and I want to pay my respects to the elders past and present. My name is Maria Sjödin. I'm the executive director of Outright International, who work together with, I see many of you in this room, people on this panel. We work together for better LGBTIQ lives. And I think I was asked to moderate this panel because at Outright, we have an increased body of work around these topics. And we have set as a strategic objective in our plan to queer the humanitarian field. And in practice, that means a few weeks ago, we launched a report about the situation in Afghanistan for LGBTI people 18 months after the Taliban takeover. We're obviously going to hear more about that. We launched a Ukraine fund a year ago that to date has distributed over $2.5 million to organizations working in Ukraine and some of the border countries to support people as a result of Russia's war. I couldn't be more honored than to moderate this panel today. You're going to hear from 4 incredible speakers: Artemis Akbary, founder of Afghan LGBT; Olena Shevchenko, the executive director of Insight NGO in Ukraine; Edison, Ichon, Butar, with the crisis response mechanism in Indonesia; and Lisa Davis, law professor and special advisor on gender persecution to the International Criminal Court Prosecutor. So we're going to start by setting the stage a little bit. And I mean, in talking to my fellow panelists here, I've said, obviously, any of these topics deserve their own 3-hour session. And we have 50 minutes for all of it. So you're just going to get the brief overview and the highlights, if you will. But I want to start with my first question. What are the most important things for people to know about the war or crisis that you're addressing and how it affects LGBTIQ people? Olena, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for visiting this session and your readiness to hear what is happening in such a crisis situation like we are all now in Ukraine. I came from Kiev. I'm still there. That was my personal decision to stay in Ukraine, not going anywhere to save my life, because I felt that responsibility that I'm pretty much privileged among other LGBTQI regular casual persons who are still there in Ukraine, because at least I have some knowledge, some skills, some networking things, and I know many people abroad who can support Ukraine. That was my first thing. That's why I'm still there, trying to do anything possible to support people on the ground. And it is not so easy, because from the first day, then I woke up from the shellings outside, and I saw the huge explosions in my capital in Kiev. I walked on the streets and saw the thousands of people who tried to escape the war. So many people so scared, don't know what to do. And that was the moment then I realized that nobody will come and save me. Nobody will come and save others. Like, it is not a usable thing, like nobody is left behind. Believe me, everybody will be left behind, because the main issue is that, unfortunately, the huge international security system is not about safety. It's not about, vulnerable communities who can be saved by this international system. It is a huge failure of that huge machine, and we need to rethink how we can together change it to make it more human, to make it more useful, because it obviously doesn't work. Like, so many millions of people are now refugees trying to seek safety in different countries. So many among them are LGBTQI persons who are trying to escape. But the additional burden on the LGBTQI communities, that's what we are invisible. We're still invisible. We don't have equal rights in Ukraine. We are not seen as relatives. We are not seen as families. And that causes another pressure and additional things trying to seek for the recognition in other countries as well. But in Ukraine, so many LGBTQI people are now on the front lines trying to fight for our freedom. They are dying every day, became soldiers, became a volunteer as me, 24/7 working to get at least some humanitarian support to Ukraine, to addressly give it to those people who need it the mostly. And it's not so easy, believe me, because the humanitarian missions have their own standards, their own strategies, and it doesn't fit. They just think that they know better about the needs on the ground. They are not asking about our analysis. They are not asking what we need. They just bring what they have and not trying to somehow, rethink the whole international system. And this is not fair. And I think our main aim is to show that then the war is coming to countries, then the crisis is coming to countries. The first who will go there, like on the streets, to the most marginalized people, are us, activists. We are now the most visible ones in Ukraine, LGBTQI activists fighting not only for LGBTQI equality and rights, but fighting with the evil for freedom and for the new world. So basically, it is our burden, it is our main aim to show the other world that it should be values comes first, and then everything else. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olena. Thank you so much. Artemis, we're going to go to you next.
Well, in my perspective, LGBTI people in Afghanistan, they are the most vulnerable groups in Afghanistan, and they are the most marginalized groups in Afghanistan. But before that, I want to warn you that some part of my speech might be contain some sensitive contents, and it might be traumatizing for some of you. But in order to give you a clear picture about the current situation of LGBTI people in Afghanistan, I need to provide some examples. Actually, LGBTI people in Afghanistan, they have never been safe in Afghanistan. For example, in the previous government, in the previous regime, in our semi-democratic regime, the punishment for same-sex relationship, it was imprisonment. Many LGBTI Afghans were arrested, beaten, were harassed by the police in the previous regime. Unfortunately, the first and the most enemy of the LGBTI people's enemy are their own families, family members. Many LGBTI people in Afghanistan, they have been killed by their own family members. They have been tortured. They have been beaten by their own family members. Right now, with the arrival of Taliban, the situation became harder and more difficult for them. In the first week of arrival of Taliban in Afghanistan in 2021, the judge of Taliban said that the punishment for same-sex relationship is death penalty. It's two things. The first one is stoning until death, and the other one is breaking down the wall over them. According to ITV TV channel, a gay man was raped and beaten by 2 Taliban soldiers. According to Human Rights Watch report, a gay man was killed horribly. They cut his body into pieces because he was gay. Many lesbians, trans men, non-binary people have been forced to marry a man. According to our organization's investigation, many of the LGBTI people have been disappeared by the Taliban, and we don't know whether they are alive or not. Taliban spokesperson recently said that we don't have gay people in Afghanistan. These are the Western values that brought by the NATO and Western countries into Afghanistan. And also recently, they said that gender affirmation surgery in Afghanistan is forbidden because it's haram in Islam. Right now, there is a heartbreaking humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. At least 70% of people of Afghanistan, they don't have access to food. half of the society of Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan, they are deprived of their basic rights. They cannot go to schools, they cannot go to work, they cannot go to universities, and even they cannot go to work. They cannot go to park. And believe me, the most vulnerable people in this situation are the LGBTI people in Afghanistan. I receive many pictures, videos, from the messages, emails from the suffering LGBTI people in Afghanistan. It's really heartbreaking. I've seen some videos and pictures that they are eating grass and leaves because they don't have food to eat. I've seen with my own eyes that people are looking for food in trash and garbages. A gay man drank water for 1 week because he didn't have food to eat. He didn't have access to food to eat. And at the end, he attempted to do suicide. Because of this horrible condition in Afghanistan, because of this terrible condition in Afghanistan, they tried to escape from Afghanistan and go to another country. But unfortunately, all the safe and legal pathway, all the legal and safe passage were blocked by the Western democratic governments, and because they don't issue visa for Afghan citizens, and that's why they cross the border on their foot and they go to neighboring countries. But unfortunately, even neighboring countries are not safe for them. For example, Iran. The punishment of same-sex relation is death penalty. Many LGBTI people, they try to go to Turkey, to Europe, but unfortunately they face those violences and discrimination at the EU border, between EU and Turkish border. For example, a gay man was raped by the Greek police borders. 24 Afghan and Iranian asylum seekers have been naked and beaten by the Bulgarian police border, and they were deported to Turkey. There is no safe and legal pathway for the asylum seekers. Today in the morning, we had a representative from the EU, and also we had a representative from the Australian government, and they said that we support the LGBTI people all around the world. If you want to support the LGBTI people all around the world, you must support the LGBTI asylum seekers too, because they don't... Just 3 days ago, at least 64 Afghan asylum seekers have been killed in the Mediterranean Sea because of the policy of the European Union. Among them were some children, and there are many people that they are looking for them. Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear siblings, we need your maximum support. I need your maximum support for the LGBTI people in conflict zones like Afghanistan, like Ukraine, like Iran, like Pakistan. And do not forget that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Artemis, for sharing that. Ichon, we're going to go to you next.
Thank you, Maria, for having me here. All right. If we're talking about the crisis against LGBT peoples, because I'm from Indonesia, the big question is, does the LGBT in Indonesia experience the crisis? Because in this country, there is no huge war or anything, but I'm going to summarize what exactly happened. The human rights crisis against LGBT people in Indonesia since the situation happened since 2016, when there is a huge crackdown, LGBT crackdown in my country, and because our government said the LGBT ideology trying to destroy the educational institutional in Indonesia because there is the organization in campus to promote the sexual and reproductive health in campus. And this is become the moral panic in Indonesia because our parents, our society is really afraid the education institutional will be destroyed by LGBT people. And since that year, many hate speech and also the violence and discriminations against LGBT became institutionalized since 2016 in Indonesia. And this situation taken was taken by anti-gender movement in Indonesia to trying to criminalize LGBT people through their judicial review, the criminal code, since 2016. However, they failed. But in 2018, they're trying to shift the criminalization agenda to the rehabilitation agenda against LGBT peoples in Indonesia. And what the result of that situations, in 2021, the local government in Bogor City, it's around 50 kilometers from capital city of Indonesia, passed the local ordinance about the prevention and control sexual deviant behavior in that city, and including the LGBT peoples. And through the local ordinance, they also established the commission that focused to profiling, to find the LGBT people, and collaboration with school to rehabilitate the LGBT community in Bogor City. And what else? And also in 2022, the Indonesian House Representative also passed the new criminal code. This is the bigger issue. This is the biggest issue right now in Indonesia, because there is several discriminatory provisions in the new criminal code, especially for the LGBT peoples. For example, the living law, and also cohabitation and something like that, and so on. And also, this is really potential to arbitrary raids and arrest the LGBT community in Indonesia because of the new criminal code. And even that, I would say, Indonesia has been criminalized the LGBT people since 2014 in Aceh province, because they have the Islamic criminal code in there and criminalize the LGBT people in Aceh. And what also happened in the beginning of this year, in January, there is a 5 province in Indonesia trying to propose the anti-LGBT local ordinances. That's specific for the anti-LGBT, how to, not only to rehabilitation, but also to criminalize the LGBT people in Indonesia. Because all of that situation, our organizations, there is a documented and handling, there is a significant increased cases against LGBT, especially since 2016 in Indonesia. And yeah, that's the situation, how the human rights crisis against LGBT people in Indonesia right now.
Thank you so much, Ichon. So, I mean, the situations that the three of you describe, of course, on the surface looks nothing like each other, except that LGBTIQ people are being attacked and suffering under this. But what has struck me in our discussions is really sort of how you and your organizations have all stepped up to help your own communities. And so I want to come back to each of you. Give us some of the examples. Like, I framed it, I think, originally as a success story, and maybe it's not, a complete success, but like, what are the good practices and the good examples that you have been able to be part of as part of your organizations? Olena, why don't we go back to you again?
Well, I will tell you different stories of the good practices which we should continue to use, by the way. The first one is solidarity. Because, in Ukraine during the first 4 months, there were no international humanitarian missions helping somebody. It's just us, volunteers, individuals, small organizations who just put all the resources, to support the most marginalized communities and groups. Organized everything from the zero, seriously. And so many people came that time, I couldn't even imagine this feeling which is still with me. I feel so much pride. I'm so proud about all those people who came to us, to LGBTQI organization, you know, even taking into account so much marginalization, stereotypes, you know, in Ukrainian society. But not only LGBTQIA people and activists came, just regular people, heterosexual people, mostly women, by the way, because, you know, women always do all the work, which is about carrying, nothing received as a, you know, salaries or something. They just wanted to be the part of this community which is doing something, which give you the feeling that you are not lost, you are not alone, you are in the community. We have so many volunteers now, and mostly people are coming still. They just want to do everything. They want to pack. They want to go search for some boxes because it also costs money. They just trying to get anything which can be sent to those people on the occupied territories, you know, on the eastern part of Ukraine, to those people who can't access the general support because they from the vulnerable communities. That what is always forgotten, that you can't just think that you will help some general public. There is no general public. It's just different vulnerable groups. Accessibility, you know, many children, you don't have like access to shops, stores, everything closed, destroyed. You can't just find food. In Ukraine, we don't have electricity. We don't have, you know, connections. I can't call my mom to ask how is she, because it's not possible. And then somebody is saying, like, trying to organize the Zoom from international organizations, like, you will go, I don't know, in the last, you know, minutes. So can you put more light on your picture? No, I can't, because I'm sitting there, I'm fucking freezed, and I also have one lighter, you know? I can't put more light on my Zoom or improve my connectivity. It's just not possible. So the good stories is that people are there. They don't want to leave, by the way. And those who left, they want to come back, but they don't have anything there. No houses, no relatives. So many people were killed, and LGBTQI people, unfortunately, still left behind, and even thinking about the future, how we will persecute all those criminal offenses, you know, the crimes during the war. I don't see any possibilities, because it's just not included there. Like all those things I saw, those questionnaires for women who were raped, for people like who lost their relatives. There is nothing about LGBTQI people, so we don't have a data because it's just not included. And that's the same what is happening with everything and everywhere in Ukraine. But people still fighting, people still believe in the freedom and in our values.
Thank you so much, Olena. Ichon, let's go to you next. Like the response mechanism that you have set up, like how does it work? How are you able to help people?
Yeah, right. Yeah, because in the crackdown 2016, the LGBT movement in Indonesia cannot do anything because the crackdown is really sudden happened in that years. Because of that, we tried to establish the mechanism how to respond to the crisis, not only in that year, but also in the future. Because of that, there is like 30 organizations in Indonesia, including our allies, establish the crisis response mechanism. And this crisis response mechanism, like the combination of the humanitarian approach and humanitarian approach, how to handle the crisis. And as a crisis response mechanism, and right now to make it effectively, we have a 5-member organizations and legal aid organization, also including the LGBT organization and also the UNAIDS Indonesia in our members. We have 2 mandates of this crisis response mechanism. The first is about the prevention of the crisis, and the second is about how to respond when the crisis happens to LGBT peoples. In the prevention things, we are focusing how to to prevent the crisis. For example, because we develop the guidance how to respond to crisis, and also every time the crisis will be happened in Indonesia, we disseminate the early warning notification to our community. The early warning notification is like a simple document that can you read rapidly, and in that document it's including what the situation happened and what the mitigation that you can do and what the contingency that you can do when you face that crisis, and who the organization or the person that you can reach out if you face the crisis. Every time that crisis happens, we do that. For example, last year, because of the criminal code and also any situation crisis in Indonesia, we disseminated around 3 early warnings notification to our community. In addition, also we develop the tools that accessible to the community, the risk assessment tools that can access it online and also offline. The tools is including what your capacity, what your vulnerability, and what the threat that you face. And that it's like quiz, and when you fill it the applications, that you will get your risk status right now. There is the 3-level status that we develop in the crisis response mechanism. The first is like alert, in Indonesia is waspada. It's like a disaster level status. It's the same, but different context. And the second is the yellow, and the last is the red, is the emergency. And when I fill the application risk assessment, and every time I get the risk status, and I also, the CRM also automatically send the security plan to our email. So that is what we do in CRMs. And other also we trying to make, because crisis response is the new things in Indonesia, how to respond to crisis. Because of that, we also trying to increase the capacity of our community about the crisis management. Because it's different how to handle the regular cases and how to handle the crisis. It's totally different. In our curriculum, we include how to identify and how to identify the situation. When the situation, we can say crisis, and when the situation, you can say not crisis. And also how to report that crisis and how to handle the crisis. And the most important thing in the prevention also, we develop the comprehensive mechanism, the community paralegal comprehensive. It's like the frontliner, how to report every day the situation, and also to assist the community that experience the crisis.
Thank you so much, Ichon, for explaining how you are supporting people and your communities. Artemis, what are you able to do, and what are some of the good examples that you have been able to see?
When Afghanistan fell down, I've seen that LGBTI people, they were marginalized by the Persian media. Unfortunately, I've seen that all of them, all the medias, they were talking about everything. For example, the women's rights, the ethnic minorities' rights, except LGBTI people. That's why we started our campaign to raise awareness about the situation of LGBTI people, and also through our radio, we amplified the voice of LGBTI people in Afghanistan. And also we share their stories. We try to amplify their voices at the international level. And also immediately after the fall of Afghanistan, when I entered in Czech Republic, I established our organization, ALO. ALO is a very, very young organization, but we did many great things. It's a grassroots organization. We don't receive funds from the state or other organizations. We do just fundraising, and we help at least 200 people in Afghanistan. We provide financial aid to them, and also at least 87 people have been evacuated from Afghanistan. Also, I should mention that in cooperation with other organizations to European countries, and also we help 37 people, LGBT people in Afghanistan, to obtain humanitarian visa.
That's so great to hear. Thank you so much. So, I mean, there are very few avenues for international justice for LGBTIQ people who suffer war or under crisis situations. But we have hope that the International Criminal Court could become an institution that better addresses particularly severe situations. So, Lisa, can you please explain a little bit, like, what role do you see that the ICC could have?
Sure. Thanks, Maria. Well, I just want to say that, you know, it is shocking when you look around at conflicts that have happened currently throughout history, that we have never, in our modern international history, we have never upheld crimes committed against LGBTIQ people in any international tribunal or mechanism. Never. That's outrageous, right? We have to do better. We know these crimes happen. We've just heard 3 country contexts of conflict or crisis where these crimes happen. We know LGBTIQ community members are organizing, they're documenting, they're helping people escape. We've seen the reports that groups like Outright Action International also do in terms of elevating visibility on these crimes. But yet for decades, we've never been able to hold them accountable. How is that even possible? I mean, how is that possible? And I think part of the reason is because we just don't see these crimes in terms of a criminal context. So the language that we use in the international community that the UN uses is gender-based violence, right? We all know what that is, SGBV, sexual and gender-based violence. But gender-based violence, that's not a crime. I just want you to absorb that, right? That's not a crime. That is a term of art. And you can't charge a term of art. You have to charge a crime. So you can't charge someone with gender-based violence. You could charge domestic violence or sexual violence, but gender-based violence is more of a theory, an academic exercise. It's rhetoric. So what's the charge? What's the charge that you use to hold perpetrators accountable of crimes committed against LGBTIQ+ people? That charge is called gender persecution. It has a name. It exists, and it's been on the law books for decades. But for as long as it's been on the law books, there's never been a single successful charge or prosecution of gender persecution ever. That's not tolerable. We have to do better. And because of this, the International Criminal Court has a new prosecutor. He just came in a year ago, and he commissioned to have a policy written on gender persecution. I wrote that policy. And that policy says, for the first time that I've seen in court documents at the ICC, it says the words LGBTIQ. It spells out the acronym. And it says that these are people that have rights, they can be victims in conflict, and they deserve redress, and crimes that happen against them need to be prosecuted, and it shows how. But it's just, thank you. But it's just a piece of paper until we put it to action. So we need to work together. We need to start documenting crimes in conflict, doing the work that you've heard on this panel today, doing the work that Outright Action International does, raising that visibility, and calling for accountability specifically for gender persecution, because that is our charge, and that is our tool, and we need to use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lisa. And I think we are all hoping that there could, in the future, really be charges brought against at least some of the perpetrators. So I want to ask another question of everyone on the panel. It's like, everyone in this room, they're here because they're interested, but I know some of them are also thinking, like, what can they do? So what are some of the ways that you think that, you've already talked about international solidarity and solidarity in groups, like, what are some advice that you can give to people? What can they do to be helpful?
That's a very good question. One day before the Mardi Gras, I was invited to ABC drum show, and the first question, unexpectedly, because everything which follows those questions was about the Ukraine, but the first question was, what does it mean to you, the pride? The world pride, you know, the prides around the world. And people before me, they said, like, it is a celebration for them. And I said, it is not, because it's still not a celebration, and I don't think, like, it applies to any other countries, even peaceful countries, you know, where the marriage equality, for instance, already established. It's not, because we still see so many issues with refugees, migrants, white supremacy, poverty, especially, you know, in our communities. So I don't have anything, unfortunately, to celebrate today. I have to fight, and so many people around the world lose their lives, you know, they closed ones, just to fight for the equality. And it's not just words, because we have many meaningful sense, you know, behind those words. So that's why we need to remind ourselves that we are not there. It's not an equality. It's not an equal world, unfortunately. We need to change so many things now. And all those crises, all those wars, just showed us the examples, what is happening. Because it's not like just welfare community which can go together and celebrate the pride. Yes, we need to be proud. Like, we're proud of ourselves, but we need to remember that this is a riot. It is a fight for our lives everywhere, in every country. And we need to remember all those folks, you know, our sisters and brothers who died without anything, like without any rights, without any visibility. That's what we are fighting for, I guess, and it is very important to me, like, remind myself as well, because, you know, if I heard that, you know, these war crimes, they are seen as violations of the rules and norms of the war, what the fucking norms and rules the war can have? But that's international vision, and I don't think that's right. I think it should be rethinked, and we need to put another system of support, another system of justice, which will include everybody and specifically talks about the most vulnerable communities, which we are still.
Thank you so much. Artemis, what do you want people to be able to do?
As I mentioned before, people are dying, people have been killed because of the Taliban, and right now they seek for international recognition from the international community. We shouldn't recognize Taliban as a government unless they accept to respect to LGBT rights, to human rights, to women's rights. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, 2 days ago, the embassy of Afghanistan in Iran handed over to the Taliban. The consulate of Afghanistan in Istanbul handed over to the Taliban. Many LGBTI activists and LGBTI people are living in Iran, living in Turkey. Many human rights defenders and journalists are in Iran, in Turkey, and they are in great danger. The international community must not recognize Taliban. The second thing that we can do is that we should support them financially, because right now there is a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. People are dying because they don't have food to eat. Also, if you want to donate money, you can go to our website. We should support the LGBTI refugees. Unfortunately, the European Union adopted a new policy of migration and migration pact, and through this migration and asylum pact, asylum seekers will be suppressed. Right now, the budget of Frontex, the organization that controls the control the EU borders, has increased, and Frontex is the main reason that thousands of asylum seekers, including LGBTI people, have been killed at the EU borders. We should abolish this horrible organization. The another thing that we can do is that raising awareness. Many LGBTI people, unfortunately, they were marginalized. I've seen many times that we have heard that we don't have LGBTI people in Afghanistan. Also, I've heard many times that LGBTI people in Afghanistan, they don't have any activists and organizations. We should raise awareness about their situation. For example, in the European Union, I've seen many times that the people of European Union, they don't even know where is Afghanistan. And the last thing that we can do is to empowering the LGBTI civil societies and LGBTI activists. They are right now in Europe, they are in Australia, they are in different countries, but they are traumatized, they have many challenges and problems, and they need to be empowered to fight again. And you can empower the LGBTI movements from Afghanistan. Right now, I know it is really hard, it is really difficult, but together we can do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Ichon, from your perspective, what do you think that people can do to be supportive?
Actually, since 2021, when we handle and support around 4,000 individual LGBT in Indonesia experience the crisis, there is the huge gap in there. The gap is about to provide the emergency funds, because in the LGBT movement around the world, sometimes just focus to provide the emergency fund for the LGBT human rights defender. However, in Indonesia, non-LGBT right defender is also experience the crisis. So what I want to suggest is, when you are a donor and provide the emergency funds, not only prioritizing for the LGBT right defender, but also the whole community. This is the important to respond to crisis. And the second is also about, because in the last year, the Indonesian received 13 recommendations and UPR about the comprehensive anti-discrimination, specific for the LGBT, to protecting the LGBT people. I think as a global community, we can together how to push our government to take that recommendation and to make that recommendation will be happens. And the last thing that I want to say is, in the crisis situations, it's not enough just to create a hope, but how we working on that hope in solidarity. And so, because I reflect in CRM, what we do, it's become meaningless without solidarity from you and from many our allies. So it's important to respond this crisis in solidarity. And I'm sitting here right now in front of you to encourage you to be part of the response the crisis, and base whatever you can do in not only Indonesia but in Afghanistan, also in Ukraine, in over the world that have in the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lisa, what do you think that people could do or should do?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to continue documenting. We have to raise visibility about how these crimes work and who the victims are. We need to provide trainings to first responders so that they know how to access, how to find victims, how to provide appropriate services to those victims. And we need to remember that victims of conflict have a right to sit at the table for peace and reconciliation processes. And this includes victims of gender persecution. And using that framing allows us a bigger seat at the table, because it's a bigger grouping that we're capturing by looking at it through that lens of that crime. And then when we're looking at crimes in conflict and we're documenting them, we have to see how they might be gendered. So sometimes we get them right away because it's pretty direct or apparent, but sometimes it's not so direct or apparent. Sometimes it's a little bit hidden in the way that crimes happen. So for example, bombing of a building can be a war crime. That's a war crime. So what about destroying a building because it was an LGBTIQ center? Or bombing a school because you didn't want girls to go to school? So these kinds of crimes, these can also be gender persecution. So it doesn't even have to be physical violence on an individual per se. It could be violence in the form of, destroying cultural heritage. And so looking at these kinds of acts too that happen in conflict and saying, how can we capture these in our briefs and in our accountability mechanisms so that we're capturing the whole picture of what happens in terms of how discrimination works in conflict? Because sure, we'll get we'll probably get the rape and the torture and the murder. We'll get those charges. We'll get those crimes. But if we don't understand why those crimes happen, if we don't understand why that man was killed because he was perceived as gay, or why that woman was tortured because she was identified as a lesbian, if we don't get that part of the question, then we're only getting half the story of what happens in conflict. And if we don't get the whole story, we can never build sustainable peace after conflict. So that's the kind of work that I think we need to be doing.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we have a microphone, could take one or two questions from the audience. I don't think we have a microphone, so this gives me the opportunity to keep asking questions. That was just a fake thing, I asked him for the microphone. I'm just trying to seem inclusive here. Okay, so we're about to wrap up, and I mean, this panel, we're talking about
Oh, you have a question?
very difficult situations.
We have questions.
Yeah, this is a difficult question. So what advice would you give for movements needing to rally different regional chapters together for a collective vision, all with cultural differences?
Well, in my perspective,
Yeah.
we should focus on our common values, common values. Then through common values, we can networking, we can find each other, and then we can build our movements. For example, Afghanistan and Iran, for example, for years they were separated from each other because of our governments. We had many conflicts and problems. But right now, the people are informed, and right now they are focusing on their common values. For example, common language, common cultures, common history that they had in the past. So that's why we've seen, right now, we have seen a very strong solidarity between the Iranian people, Iranian LGBTI people and Afghan LGBTI people, and their movements are working together. They have a strong cooperation together. I think common values, focusing on common values is the best option for strengthening the movements.
Olena, I've heard you talk about like
Common
bringing
values,
different,
yeah. But the thing is that first you need to give voice and power to locals. Just give that power to locals. They will decide the best for their own countries and contexts, including cultural differences and everything else. So only in that way we can build shared values, really shared values. Then nobody will feel like somebody is coming from the international donors, organizations, or missions, imposing on you their vision and their priorities. That is not something which unites people. So you need go, local. You need go local. Just local will build something else, something bigger, which will bring us the completely another vision of the world, and hopefully it will be more human.
So, thank you so much. We're gonna wrap up shortly. So, in spite of all the hard work that you're doing, I would love for each of you to say something about what gives you hope in the hard work that enables each of you to keep doing what you're doing.
I already said that just people who surrounded me in my local context. That's why I don't see myself anywhere else than in Ukraine, doing that work, which now I'm doing, and I feel this, It's like you're not knowing how, but you feel like this is the right way and this is the right place to be.
Thank you. Ichon, what gives you hope?
My personal hope? I think it's the same because if we're living in the crisis situation, the hope is when the crisis is end, the first thing. But the most important thing is how we have a supportive allies in there, because you know how it feels when you feel alone in the crisis situation. It's really hard, and it's really sometimes you feel lonely and feel hard. Because of that, it's really important as allies, not only in this country, in the country, but also around the globe, how you give a solidarity to everyone, to every LGBT that experience the crisis.
Thank you. Artemis.
Well, first of all, my personal experience, because I was a refugee for my whole life, and I walked on my foot to cross the border, to go to different countries, to find safety, peace, and dignity. And the other thing is, when Afghanistan fell down, there was a gay man who lost his leg because of bomb explosion, and he had many problems and difficulties, and he was beaten because of his sexual orientation and different gender expression. He had many difficulties, and our organization helped him to, we evacuated him to Spain. Right now he's in Spain. And when I saw his eyes, his smiles, I was so happy, and he was so happy. And that's why, at that moment, I decided to give that smile and give that hope to other people, to other LGBTI people in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much. Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Well, what gives me hope is seeing the resilience and the commitment from activists who work in crisis and conflict contexts and aren't stopping. They're working on the ground, on the front lines, whether from other countries or within the country, to help bring redress, to help save victims every single day, and to make sure that these crimes do not go invisible. And I think that we are at a sea change moment where we can finally start to bring redress to these crimes, something that's never been done in history, and that gives me hope that the hard work that everyone has been doing to bring these crimes to light and to protect victims is going to go somewhere. It's going to go somewhere, hopefully, that can help make change.
Thank you. We're going to wrap up, and what I want to say in closing is that I think many of us in this room and many of those watching online, I'm sure, we all see ourselves as activists. We may be in a very local context, or national, or regional, or international. And what I am taking away from what I've heard from you today is the importance for us to be in solidarity and to do both. Like, you may be doing your local work, but you also have to think globally. And we all have to be part of holding our governments to account, because there is a lot that's needed to be done. A big hand for this wonderful panel. Thank you so much for sharing all the challenges that you're seeing. Thank you so much for being here, and please keep informed and keep learning. Thank you all very much.